The result will be more new businesses, more new jobs, innovation that allows the United States to aggressively compete in a global economy, and the empowerment of every American to pursue the American dream. Mr. President, I note the absence of quorum.
Clerk will call the roll.
Mr. Hickok. The pending business here in the Senate is a sportsman's bill that would expand hunting and fishing on federal lands. A vote to move the measure forward is scheduled for 5:30 Eastern. Later this week, members of Congress are supposed to meet with President Obama at the White House about the fiscal cliff. Earlier today, we talked with former Senator Evan Bayh of Indiana about political gridlock in Washington.
The former senator from Indiana served as Democrat for that state from 1999 to 2011, now co-founder of the No Labels organization. Senator Bayh, let me just begin with the Petraeus resignation, the fallout for the CIA. What's your reaction? You served on the Intelligence Committee.
I did for 10 years, and I remain on what's called the External Advisory Board to the agency. It's a personal tragedy. David Petraeus has served our country, very capable. He was doing a fabulous job as director, but obviously had some lapses in judgment that have led to this position. We're fortunate that at the agency we've got a great leadership team. Mike Morell has now stepped in, very capable individual. Others there are capable of stepping in, but there are going to be some changes in the top ranks, so it's going to be a time of transition for the agency, but it's in good hands.
Did he have to go? Did he have to resign?
Well, I would accept his judgment and the President's about that. My own answer is, yeah, I think he did. There's a lot of chatter out there that this was just a sex scandal, and why is that important these days? My answer to that would be there are a handful of positions in the government. Director of the CIA is one of them, where you can't have someone who is susceptible. Not, in fact, that doesn't appear to be the case here, but is susceptible to potential for being blackmailed. I mean, what if his paramour had been blackmailed into then trying to get information from him? That sort of thing takes place all the time in the espionage world. You can't have the Director of Central Intelligence with that kind of potential vulnerability. Department of, X, Y, or Z, maybe not so much. But head of the Department of Defense, head of the CIA, can't have that.
If it's known that Attorney General Eric Holder or FBI Director, if they knew long before the election, and they did not tell the President, or they did tell the President, as our last guest said, the President did know. There was a directive that came down from the top that this would not be told to the public until after the election. What's your reaction to that?
Well, I think we ought to wait and find out what the facts are before we offer comments about this. So I'm not prepared to offer a judgment until I know what the case is. That said, this is a tough situation because it appears that the FBI, the law enforcement agency, concluded there was no law broken. They concluded there was no national security breach. There was a lapse in judgment, but the nation wasn't harmed, no law was broken. What do you do in a case like that?
Should the Intelligence Committee members have known?
Well, I was on the Intel Committee, and you want to know right away. That's how the members view things. But again, no national security breach, no laws broken, personal lapse in judgment. He probably needed to resign. What do you do in a case like that? You said you
still serve on an advisory board to the CIA?
We meet quarterly.
What is that board? What is the group? Well,
it's all public knowledge. I'm not divulging anything new here today.
But for those that might not know outside of Washington, what do you advise on?
It's a group of 16, 20 individuals with long experience in the intelligence, foreign policy, national security arena who serve as a sounding board and a resource for the director about major issues that the agency is facing. And so we meet quarterly. I think Leon Panetta started this, General Petraeus carried it on, and we review a variety of issues and then offer our thoughts to the director for whatever they're worth.
All right, so let's move on to then the fiscal issue, the so-called fiscal cliff. Lots of stories in the papers today that President Obama is meeting with labor leaders who are insisting that the president not change entitlements. No cuts to Medicare and Social Security. Do you agree?
Well, I think some adjustments are going to have to be made. Social Security today is a lot different than it was when Franklin Roosevelt first instituted it, so it's not as if it's etched in stone as some sort of holy writ. That said, it's got to be a balanced approach, and I think that's what the president is going to say, that to actually save the entitlement programs, the nation is on the road to bankruptcy. To save them, you have to make some adjustments, but you have to do it in a way that also calls for some additional revenue. And how you do that through tax restructuring and possibly asking those who've been most successful in society to do a bit more to help get the deficit down. That balanced approach is what I think he's going to insist on. So I think you'll find both sides. My party, the left, will be saying no changes to entitlements whatsoever. On the far right, they'll be saying no revenue whatsoever. What needs to happen and what ultimately will happen will be something somewhere between the 40-yard lines.
Do you think Democrats are serious about deficit reduction?
I think so, and in part because we have to be. The markets will not allow us to continue to go down this path any longer. If we, for example, went over the fiscal cliff without some framework for resolving the problem being announced, I think you would see the equity markets sell off dramatically, the dollar would fall, interest rates would begin to rise. It would be very harmful to the real economy. In fact, the uncertainty today, I think, is harming the economy in itself. Business people are postponing investments. They're delaying hiring decisions because they don't know what kind of tax structure they're going to be dealing with. So we have to resolve this problem if we want to get the economy growing again, if we want to keep the country on a stable basis. So, yes, I think Democrats are serious about it. Now, most Democrats' approach to resolving it, the balance, would be different than many Republicans. But that's why we have a legislative and governmental processes to, hash all that out.
What should be the president's message then to labor leaders today, labor leaders who take credit for re-electing him to a second term? What should be the message on compromise?
I think he should say, I share your values. I'm devoted to saving these programs. I'm devoted to the progressivity of these programs. You can count on that. But we may need to make some modest adjustments over the next 20, 30, 40 years in order to maintain the financial solvency of the government and, in fact, to save these programs. So some modest adjustments and changes may be necessary to save the very programs themselves. I think that's what he needs to tell the labor leaders.
If that is true, and we've heard from Senate Majority Leader Harry Reid that he does not think Social Security should be on the table, that no one is touching Social Security is what he has said. But centrist Democrats, like yourself, and there are more of them now in the Senate, say, we're willing to compromise on this issue. What's the payback from party leaders?
Well, there's change and then there's change. As you'll recall in, what was it, 1982 or 3, back in the 80s, Tip O'Neill and Ronald Reagan got together and made some adjustments to Social Security that saved the program. That's my point. Sometimes you need to adjust and change to save the very thing that you care most about. And so Tip O'Neill didn't sell out the Democratic Party by embracing that agreement. The Democrats in Congress, many of them very progressive at that time, who supported it, weren't traitors to the party. So I think if we do it in a responsible way that's balanced and doesn't just gut the programs and is just not all entitlement reform with no revenue, I think the base of the party and leaders in organized labor will understand. And they also know that the alternative is either A, doing nothing with bad damage to jobs in the economy and ultimately insolvency of these programs themselves, or B, the right wing of the Republicans are coming in and taking over because we've done nothing to solve the problem, and their answer to the solution would be much more draconian.
Let's go to Jack. He's our first phone call for Senator Bai in Gracie, Kentucky, Republican. Go ahead.
Mr. Bai, I have one question. Can you guarantee people that they hadn't let Stinger missiles get loose over there in Libya?
Jack, I thought you were going to ask me about why Indiana University and Kentucky weren't playing in basketball this year. That would be a hard question. But for the first time in years and years, Indiana and Kentucky aren't playing, and we're rivals across the Ohio River there. Jack, I can't talk about classified intelligence information on TV, as you can understand. Clearly, things like Stinger missiles, those sorts of weapon systems are potentially very problematic, and we do everything we can to keep track of them as much as humanly possible. Now, Muammar Gaddafi and his regime had stockpiles of weapons like that, shoulder-fired ground surface-to-air missiles, and we're doing everything we can to try and track those down and secure them. But the region, and that country in particular, was awash in these kind of things. It's kind of chaotic. I don't think there are any American systems that have gone missing, but it is a concern.
Let's go to Paul in Indianapolis, independent caller there. Paul, go ahead.
Good morning.
Paul, where do you live? Where do you live in Indy?
Up on the northeast corner, up in just south of Hamilton County.
Ah, Susan and I, our place is over at 86th and Ditch.
Okay, we're at 86th and Hague.
Not too far away.
No. I am a pro-life progressive, so I guess you'd call me a true independent. I don't have a party. So although I never voted for you, I never voted against you either.
Well, you're open-minded. I appreciate that.
I guess I work at St. Vincent de Paul now that I'm retired. I'm a retired civil servant. And I think we need to step outside the box, because we figured up one time with some of our clients, the people that we help, and once you get all the federal benefits, it's almost impossible to get off them, because you'd have to make almost $22 an hour once you start getting taxed on what you earn to be equivalent to what you're getting from the federal government, the state government, the county government. So it makes it almost impossible for people, once they get hooked, to get off of that, because there are very few jobs left out there for $22 an hour. Another thing is, just the other suggestion, talking about stepping outside the box, I heard Bill Clinton and David Stockman agree on one solution for the entitlement problem, and they said do away with the payroll tax and fund the Medicare and the pension system with a national sales tax, which would not only it would eliminate the advantage that like Europe and the other VAT nations have over us, because they don't charge VAT on their exports, but they charge them on the imports.
Okay, Paul, we'll take those two suggestions.
Well, Paul, many economists agree with your last point. The payroll tax tends to be pretty regressive, and it also creates a disincentive to save. The VAT-type tax creates an incentive for savings and investment and less consumption. So many economists would agree with your point, and it just goes to show if Bill Clinton and David Stockman can agree on something, there is hope for bipartisan consensus in the country, and hopefully in Washington, D.C. Of course, those two individuals are more sensible than some in the political arena today. His first point about dependency upon public assistance and that sort of thing. I've not looked at this recently, Paul, but back in the day when I was our state's governor, I and several others under President Clinton received permission to engage in what was called welfare reform. And we made the whole process much more work-related. So we said, look, if you were on public assistance, you had to participate in job training, and when a job that you were qualified came open, you had to take it. And as a result of that, the welfare rolls went down substantially, and we moved lots of people from welfare into work. I think that's how the process ought to work. You know, people who are down on their luck need a helping hand. We ought to be there for them, but it ought to be a temporary way station back to self-sufficiency, back to standing on your own 2 feet, back to being a taxpayer once again because you're gainfully employed in the private sector. So that's my take on it. We did reform the welfare system back at that time, and I would hope it's still operating on those principles, and if it's not, we need to get back to that.
Here is a tweet from J08 who says, Mr. Bai, when is a good time to raise taxes above the current, in quotations, this viewer puts, depressed percentage of GDP?
Well, there's never a great time to raise taxes. You know, it's always nice to let people keep more of their hard-earned money. But I think most economists would say that with the economy kind of bumping along at a pretty anemic growth rate, 1.5%, you know, no more than 2%, and with consumers' wages being stagnant for a decade and them still deleveraging and so forth, housing started to come back, but still, you know, below where it was. Bottom line is, you probably should wait to raise taxes until the economy has achieved a self-sustaining growth.
Even on the wealthiest of Americans?
Well, let me finish. And most people would say it's probably somewhere north of 2.5%, maybe 3%. Well, obviously, the wealthiest, most successful Americans can afford to do a little bit more, and ultimately should be asked to do a little bit more. In my conversations with them, many of them say, I'd be happy to give more to my country, but I want to know it's actually going to go to get the deficit down and not be spent on a bunch of things that may or may not be useful for the country. So that's a conversation we need to have. The trick with regard to, you know, the most affluent is they're also the ones that do the hiring. They're also the ones that make the investments. And so by raising their burdens, when the economy is growing robustly, their reaction is, no big deal, I can afford it, and still make the investments and still do the hiring. When you raise those burdens when the economy is pretty anemic, sometimes the reaction is, well, now that my taxes have gone up, maybe I should put off that investment, maybe I should delay hiring because I don't know how this whole thing's going to work out, and it makes the period of sluggishness last longer. So yes, the affluent are probably going to have to do a little bit more. My own preference would be that you kind of wait until you've got that economy growing at a robust level where it doesn't affect their hiring and investment decisions. That way it's a win-win. The economy grows, we get the deficit down, and the affluent feel like they've done their part to help the country in a way that works.
Jim, in Dundalk, Maryland, Democratic caller.
Yes, I was listening at your program. You know, I think we should go along with Obama and tax everybody over $250,000. I can remember when Franklin Roosevelt came in office, he told the wealthy when they crashed the stock market, he said if because they had all of their money out of the banks and crashed the system, he told them, say, if you don't put the money back in the banks, I will counterfeit every dollar of it. And that forced them to start putting that money back into the banks. Now, the wealthy in this country own over 50% of the wealth in this country is owned by the wealthy. And it's a shame that the people are being made to pay for what they have stolen from this country.
Okay, Jim. Evan Bai.
Well, we're going to have a big debate about where the cutoff should be, $250,000, $500,000, $1 million. Chuck Schumer, progressive Democrat from New York, and very wise about the legislative process, has said, let's make it $1 million. My guess is that's probably where the compromise will be struck. So the Republicans can say, we got the president up from $250,000 to $1 million, and the Democrats can say, everybody making over $1 million is going to do more to help the country. They're probably also going to deal with preferences and deductions, exemptions in the tax code. Those may be capped in a way where affluent people are making real aggressive use of those. That will have the effect of causing them to pay a little bit more. It'll also lead the economy to grow more quickly. So my answer to your caller is I think the affluent are going to be asked to do a little bit more. My point previously was we need to do it in a way that doesn't inadvertently hurt the economy. And, it's hard to be for more jobs in the long run, but be hostile to people who create jobs. We got to find a way to grow the economy, to get more hiring, more investment, and then ultimately ask people who've done real well to help us get the deficit down. Part of it's timing, part of it's where you draw the line. But I think one of the things I hope we can get away from in this country is this sort of us and them attitude. Ultimately, well, I'll quote the civil rights leader I once loved. I love this quote. He said, "We may have arrived on these shores in different ships, but we're all in the same boat now." That's true. And we got to start looking at that as Americans.
Here's K9 co-pilot on Twitter. Any chance we will go back to the Clinton tax rates?
I think some chance of that, yes. As I was mentioning with regard to the previous caller, my guess, and it's nothing but a guess, is that the line will eventually be drawn at probably $1 million, because you already have some Democrats out there talking about that, and the Republicans would see that as a win going up from 250, so there's some consensus there. And for above $1 million, they might very well go back to the Clinton rates. You then have to decide what you do about investment income. Capital gains, dividends, they're now at 15, historically very low. That may go up to 20. I don't think it'll go all the way back up to 39.5 or whatever it was on Bill Clinton, under President Clinton. That might stifle investment, but it will go up some. So short answer is yes. I think for people making over a certain amount, my guess is $1 million. It'll probably look a lot like it was under President Clinton.
We'll go to Pat next. Keller, Texas, Republican caller.
Hello.
Hi, Pat.
Hi. I'm so thankful to be on today. It's the first time I've been able to get in.
Well, welcome.
And Senator Bai, I have always admired you as a voice for working together in the Democratic Party. Though I am a Republican, I think this election has proved one thing to most of us, and that is that if you have the AFL-CIO rounding up 400,000 people to march and to do everything they can to elect a president, the Republicans haven't been that, what do you call it, I don't know, probably that it takes to elect people. They have to get them to the polls, and that's what's happened. It wasn't Romney. It wasn't the Republican Party that was at fault. It was us not being shrewd enough to outdo the Democrats. Now, I think you are a very great thinker, and I don't understand how so many good thinkers elected people that have no credibility and just are in the White House all the time. This is what disturbed me more than anything, and I think they're going to want to make right-to-work states in every state, including Texas, which has a wonderful economy. And I moved here 3 years ago. This is a vibrant place in Dallas, and people are moving here by droves. Now, this is very important to most Republicans to know that we have an honest-to-goodness, fair government. Thank you very much.
Senator Bai.
Well, Pat, thank you for first for your kind words about me. I appreciate it, and I hope I don't say anything this morning to change your mind. That's number one. Number two, Texas is growing by leaps and bounds. A lot of it is because of the wonderful revolution we've had in the energy sector, which has made our country much more energy independent, has brought the price of natural gas down, and we may actually be a natural gas exporter rather than importer. And so I hope that as Democrats and Republicans, we can agree that we don't want to reverse that, and we'll continue to go forward with this wonderful changes that have taken place in energy, which frankly, for my home state, we don't have a lot of oil and gas, but we do have manufacturing. We have a chance to see a renaissance in manufacturing in this country, in part because the energy prices may be much lower. So a lot of these jobs that we're going overseas may come home. Now, with regard to Pat's point, it's not customary for me to offer political advice to my Republican friends, but since I've been asked by Pat to do that, I'd make just 3 quick points. I think this election was about, a lot of different things. There's a tendency to look for one big thing and say, if we only do this, if we only do that, it would have been different. I think it's a little more complicated than that. I'd start with the candidate. That's where you always got to start. Mitt Romney, by all indications, is a fine man. Good husband, good father, good friend. He wasn't as natural a communicator as the president, and he just never seemed to be quite as comfortable on the national stage, and he had a habit of saying things from time to time that did not help him. The president is one of the most natural and gifted communicators we've seen in public life. So you start with the two candidates. The second thing is that she's right. The Democrats just technically had a much better get-out-the-vote operation. That's true, and the Republicans need to focus on that. Why was this that in those 8 or 9 key swing states, the Democrats were just better at turning out the Democratic Party base. And that involves some technical things. But the third thing, and I think the real soul-searching on the part of the Republican Party needs to be the following. I think it was 54–55% of moderates voted for Barack Obama for president. Why did the Republican Party lose the moderates? What was it about their message that drove off people who were in the middle who could kind of go either way? I suspect part of it was the farther right positions that Governor Romney was forced to take in the primary to get the nomination, and then was just stuck with them, one of which involved immigration. He lost the Hispanic vote, which is the most rapidly growing demographic in our country, by 40 points. They need to address that issue. And I think they also need to focus on not so much the economic and fiscal aspects, but some of the social issues. They don't need to change their positions, but they need to express themselves in a way that don't, for example, alienate suburban women and young people. In my own home state of Indiana, we had a Senate candidate who, in an attempt to explain his position on abortion, talked about rape, women who were impregnated by rapists, and how that if that happened, as tragic as it was God's will. A lot of people listened to that and said, he may not be representative of me. And so that would be my advice. You got to have a candidate who's a little more natural and appealing. You got to technically look at turning out your base, as Pat was mentioning. Democrats are very good at that. But finally, elections tend to be decided in the middle. What was it about the Republican Party message that was not as attractive to those moderates?
You're in the middle. You have been. Could you be a candidate for president?
Of course, in Pat's home state of Texas, a humorist once said, or I think it was maybe Jim Hightower once said, the only thing found in the middle of the road are dead armadillos. I hope I don't fall into that category.
Well, here's the Associated Press headline. Senator Bai keeps options open for his future, noting that you've held on to about $10 million in campaign money since retiring from the Senate. What are you holding it on for? What are you holding it for?
Well, I've also given away a fair amount to our new Senator Joe. Well, actually, I gave it to the state party to help all federal candidates. And then previous to that, to help with the Senate race and other congressional races in my state. So I've given away a fair amount. But I have kept some because, I'm 56 years old, which is not, I hope, ancient. I have no plans to run for office, but you just never know what the future may hold. And so I love public service. I love working for the people of my state and country. And I just wanted to keep that option open. At some point, if that option is closed, then, obviously I'll, give away the money on a more aggressive basis. But didn't want to close that window because you just never know about the future.
So is 2016 a possibility for you?
I've got no timeline. I really don't. I get asked these questions, as you can imagine. What about governor? What about senator? What about... I have no plan to run for office.
So it's not just the presidency that you
could the presidency you're talking about? Oh, I think that's unlikely.
Okay.
There was a time when I was off my medication and I was thinking about that, but pretty quickly concluded that in a field that included President Obama and Hillary Clinton, I probably was not going to be successful, and I didn't want to just run for the sake of my ego. I was very flattered to be considered for vice president, and I loved both serving in the Senate for 12 years and being governor of my state for 8. It's been a privilege for 20 years to work on behalf of the public. And
so you could return to those positions, try to seek those offices.
It's possible. It's also possible that if I was ever asked to serve in an appointed capacity, I'd be willing to consider that. I love what I'm doing in the private sector, and the odds are I'm going to continue to do that. But I also like helping people and doing good things in the world.
What are you doing in the private sector?
Doing a number of things in business and law, some boards of directors, some speeches, some television. Here we are. So I'm doing a variety of things, and I'm keeping busy. And as I mentioned, I'm on the advisory board at the CIA and do some other charitable things, too, which I enjoy.
Co-founder of No Labels.
Yes.
Trying to find so-called problem solvers in Congress. Who are some of the people that top that list to end gridlock in Washington?
We've got more moderates in the Senate and in Congress than you might suspect. And we're putting together a group. We've got about 20 signed up now. We hope to get 40 by this coming January to announce, half Democrats, half Republicans, who are practical problem solvers, to break this gridlock, who care more about doing right by the country than they do partisanship in their party, and to move the country forward.
Why not before January, when they have to deal with these issues by December 31st?
Because you're going to have a new Congress coming in, and so we have probably got to deal with people who are going to be there for the next 2 to 6 years. We're at, I think it's www.nolabels.org. For those of you who want to be interested in our group, we'd be grateful for that. And again, I think I'm going to be doing this probably with Tom Davis, a good Republican from the House, on a bipartisan basis. And the real challenge that we have is that these people are beat on by the two extremes, and they're said, if you don't toe the party line 100%, you're going to get primaried, we're going to come after you. There needs to be another group who has these people's back and say, look, you do what you think is right for the country. You solve these problems, and we'll be there to lift you up and help you out.
Back to our viewers. Independence Day on Twitter says, Senator Bai, not raising capital gains tax rate. If you, by not raising that, aren't you just protecting the main income sources of the super rich?
Well, I do think it's probably going to go up from 15 to 20%. So I do think it's going to go up. But I would rephrase the question a little bit. What I'm interested in and what's good for the country, what will grow the economy, what will create jobs, what will lead to more investments. And, you know, the capital gains rate can be raised some without affecting that. You go too far, and people stop making those investments, which lead to the hiring, which lead to a stronger economy. So I think we ought to think about what's going to lead to the better result rather than just punishing people or being hostile to people who derive most of their income from capital gains. They probably need to do more. I think they will do more. You go too far in that direction, you end up harming the very thing it is that we all hope to improve, and that's the economy.
We'll hear from Jack next. He is watching us in Rockford, Illinois, independent caller. Welcome to the conversation.
Thank you. Excuse my nervousness. I only do this about once every 5 years. We have a supply and demand economy, a capitalist economy, and it works. It works. But my thoughts are that when we have more supply than demand, then corporations may need some help, and it would be a bad time to cut their taxes. Well, at this time, we have less demand and supply. I would think that consumers need help. And Social Security people, even folks on welfare, they all buy. And I can't think of any intelligent employer who will create one single job if there's no buyer out there with money to purchase his products. So it seems to me like this is the time to cut corporate or upper income taxes and not cut any of the social benefits. Those people will spend their money. I'm on Social Security and I have to spend my money. I do buy products.
All right.
You cut my...
Yeah, Jack, we got your point. Let's get a response from the senator. Thank you.
Well, Jack, first, I thought you did great for only calling in once every 5 years, and I think you made an excellent point. What we do have in our economy is a gap between the capacity of the economy to produce and what they call aggregate demand. And part of that is because consumers, like Jack, make up 70% of the American economy. Real wages haven't gone up at all in 10 years. So folks don't have more money to spend. They borrowed more than they could afford, so they can't tap into that anymore, run up their credit card bill. Value of homes have gone down, so people are feeling less wealthy. They can't take out home equity loans and that sort of thing. That's gone. So consumers have been pretty anemic. Businesses invest, but that tends to follow consumption and demand. So business capital investment has been anemic. Exports were okay, but with Europe slowing down, with China slowing down, exports probably aren't going to pull us out of this. The final area is government. The reason for the so-called stimulus plan was to try and fill in this hole of aggregate demand, to have the government step in through tax cuts and some investments and get the economy going to a point where it would be self-sustaining. Most economists conclude that that helped, but it obviously didn't solve the problem because the recoveries from financial panics tend to take longer because of deleveraging and because of lack of confidence in the future. And so we're still in the midst of working our way through this. But I think Jack makes an excellent point. This is probably not the time to either raise taxes or cut support for things like Social Security for folks who are actually going to go out and use the money. I mentioned $1 million. Economists will argue about where that magic line is. Above that line, you're probably not going to affect consumption that much. But, you know, you get down to people making $50,000, 70, you know, below there, you would affect it. So I think he's right. This is not the time to raise burdens upon people with very modest means and modest incomes who we need to not only allow to support themselves, but also to spend that money in the economy to keep it going at a time when demand is below the capacity of the economy to produce.
Anna, in Columbus, Indiana, Democratic caller. Go ahead.
Hoosier Nation here this morning.
Yeah.
Yes.
How are things in Bartholomew County?
Oh, it's great. It's great. I'm also on Social Security, and I've worked practically all my life, and I don't live above my means. And I just thought that there's not enough citizens working in the United States, and maybe we ought to reform taxes for people that's working here from foreign countries. Maybe that would help us get our economy back on track again.
Reform taxes for people from foreign countries who are working here.
Right, yeah. Taxing them more, I assume?
Well, I think that would be an idea that would be well worth considering. I think that's probably a fairly small percentage of the American workforce. I mean, foreign nationals who are working here. Is she referring to people who are in the country illegally? That would be something else. Look, we need to take a complete look at the tax code, and I think Congress will be doing that over the next 6 months, and think about a couple of things. Number one, how do we structure it in ways that will help the economy grow? That is our biggest challenge right now. It's a very competitive world out there. Our population is aging. We're not creating enough jobs and a new investment. What can we do with this crazy, 10,000-page thing we call the tax code to streamline it and make it easier to hire people, to invest, and to grow this economy? That's number one. Then number two, we got to think about, okay, there are certain things we have to pay for, Social Security, national defense, decent health care system, those kind of things. How do we pay for that? And where do we need to set these rates? Income, capital gains, dividends, corporate tax rate, to help pay for the things that we need. And finally, the issue is one of fairness. We're all in this together. Some folks will do better than others. That's life. But we like to have a safety net to make sure that in this country, nobody's dying in the streets. There's just, there's some basic minimum of standard of living that folks get because, after all, we're a compassionate society.
You mentioned open to being in the second Obama administration. Have you talked to the White House about possibly being appointed to a job?
Well, I didn't mention this administration. I didn't say the next 4 years. I just said at some point.
All right, all right.
So I'm not lobbying for a job or anything like that here today. But look, I would be happy to serve my country or to think about it seriously if any president called me. You do that. I'll tell you a little story. Hillary Clinton and I are friends, and President Clinton and I were governors together. And Senator Clinton and I used to sit next to each other on the Armed Services Committee. And after it was announced that she was Secretary of State, she came in for a hearing, and I turned to her and I said, look, Hillary, I'm for whatever you want. But why would you do this? You're giving up your independence. You've got a national platform now. You can say what you want. You join the cabinet. You got to be a team player. You give your advice. But at the end of the day, the president decides. You've got to go out and salute the flag and be a good soldier. And she said to me, I just have always believed that when the President of the United States calls you and says he needs you to serve your country, there's only one answer you can give. So she's wired that way. I think a lot of people are wired that way. If you can help your country, you should do it.
Do you continue to talk to Senator Clinton, Secretary of State Clinton?
I've not talked to her in a while. I've talked to a lot of my former colleagues in the Senate. I talked to former President Clinton several times, but she's extraordinarily busy. She travels all over the world, works like a dog. My thought about that is I wouldn't bother, something like that unless it was really, really important.
Any insight on what she might do next?
No, and if I knew, I wouldn't say.
Okay, have to try.
What's in Washington? There's an old saying that people who don't know talk, and people who talk don't know.
All right. Rick in Ohio, Republican caller. Go ahead, Rick.
Yeah, I got a question on the jobs thing. While I was in the Navy, I'm a U.S. veteran, disabled veteran, 100%. And while I was in the Navy back in the 80s, they make all the clothing items were all made in the Republic of China, and they made us tear out all the tags of the clothing. And if we didn't do it, we got in trouble when we had inspection. That's one thing we can do is make sure all our items that we buy in our government are made in the U.S. That would increase the amount of jobs we have here. And then I had another question about this negative campaigning. Like during the election, we got a lot of negative campaigning. And what role do you think it played in the plays in the gridlock? And do you think that negative campaigning is such a good idea? And we should just have to know what the candidates, they should tell us what they're planning to do instead of just knocking each other, I think. And that's two of my questions. Thank you, and I'll listen.
Well, thank you for your call and for your questions. Let me answer the second one first. You know, I happen to be in Ohio on several occasions, and I'd get up in the morning and, you know, shave and get dressed before going off to what I had to do. It was one negative ad after another. Practically made me want to get back in the shower. You know, it's just one. You'd think we'd opened up the prisons and we were running just, you know, criminals for office or, you know, imbeciles. In fact, these are some of the finest, most publicly minded, intelligent, hardworking people in the country. And so the negative campaigning has turned a lot of people off. The question is, what do we do about it? The reason they run these negative ads is because they tend to work. And so it's up to us. If you see someone running an ad or an ad being run on that person's behalf, and that's another problem, very often today these negative ads aren't run by the candidates. They're run by some third-party group. But the message we need to send is if a candidate runs an ad that is just, you know, low down and no good and too negative, if people are trying to help that candidate by running sleazy negative ads, don't vote for them. If the ads don't work, if we reject them and say we're just not going to vote for people who are on those kind of ads, they'll stop running them. So we actually have the ultimate control over this sort of thing. His first thing was about the clothing for the military and being made in China. Look, I'm all for buying American to the extent we can, but we got to be careful about this because we want the Chinese to buy our stuff too. We're selling a lot of stuff over there. So how do we strike that balance where clearly anything that touches upon the national security interests of the United States and things where we just need to retain a productive capacity for armaments, for technology, those sorts of things, that needs to be kept close to home. For broader commodities, though, we need to compete globally because we want them to buy our stuff when we're a better producer, and that means we're going to have to, you know, buy some of their stuff when they're more of a low-cost producer. So that's the balance we need to strike.
A few minutes left here with the former Senator Evan Bayh from Indiana, served as Democrat in that state from 1999 to 2011, announced his retirement in February of 2010, and after leaving the Senate became a partner with the law firm McGuire Woods here in Washington, D.C., also co-founder of No Labels, nolabels.org if you want more information about that. Here's Matt Smith on Twitter. Raising the minimum wage would immediately put more money in consumers' pockets, increase demand. Do you support this? We learned in the papers today that labor leaders, that might be one item on their to-do list for the president and for this Congress.
Look, I've supported raising the minimum wage in the past. I think it ought to be a decent, livable wage. And he's right. People who are getting, you know, at the minimum wage or near it tend to consume that money, and it tends to help with the economy. Now, you've got to be reasonable about it, and you can't raise it so high it actually stifles employment. But I think there may be room there for an adjustment that would be helpful.
In the papers we saw, it's currently at $7.25, wanting it to raise it to $9.80 over 2 years. Sound reasonable?
You know, I've not looked at the proposals. I literally haven't. These are just numbers I'm hearing for the first time. But I think there's probably some room there for improvement that would help the workers and help the economy at the same time without going so far that business leaders just throw up their hands and say, can't afford it anymore, I'm not going to hire people.
One last phone call here for you, Senator Robert in Sparta, Illinois. Independent caller.
Yes, Senator Bayh. Thank you for hearing me. I was wondering about Social Security. You know, it seems like a red flag goes up when they talk about Social Security, which I'm on, being age 73. I wrote my congressman, why'd they ever put a cap on it like 106, 109,000, and then they quit? It's the only taxes that they put a cap on. The second thing is if they raise it, if they take that cap off, I don't see why Social Security couldn't take care of itself. They borrowed out of it. They basically, the retired people think they stole it. I don't think that is a total, but I just don't understand why they wouldn't take the cap off of Social Security. As you earn so much money, if you're a millionaire, you pay it. If you're at 106, 109,000, you just don't pay any more. So don't you think that would help it?
Well, he raises a good point. You know, for Medicare is not capped, but Social Security is. Why they structured it that way back at the beginning, I don't know. But they may take some steps to raise the cap, to do something along the lines of what the caller is saying. Whether they just remove the cap, you know, entirely, I don't know. But the caller would be interested to know that there are some aspects to Social Security that make it a progressive system already. If you've earned, you know, very modest wages throughout your life, you get a little bit more in benefits. If you have made more throughout your life, you get a little bit less. So there are some elements in there that already help to balance it. But with the solvency being a concern, I think he raises a good point.
Come back here from a few turbulent weeks, and not the least of which is the continuation of President Obama in with his work and his responsibilities, and for most of us, I would say that was a very positive thing. But something else happened during these very difficult weeks, and that is in my home state of New Jersey and the East Coast. We were hit by storms never before seen in our state, maybe never ever be seen in our country in terms of the volume of destruction. Now, my home state of New Jersey is known for a number of things. The home of innovators like Thomas Edison, the place where Alexander Hamilton, my birthplace, Paterson, New Jersey, Alexander helped start the Industrial Revolution, and also known as a state with the beautiful seashore recreation areas. Unfortunately, the wrath of Superstorm Sandy 2 weeks ago destroyed so much of our shore. Its storm surge wrecked boats, homes, and even took trains, whole trains, off the tracks. The winds reached 89 miles an hour, uprooting trees across our state, destroying everything in its path, and leaving millions, 2.5 million, without electric and staying in the dark. The force of this storm is so hard to describe in words, so I point out a picture here. It's one of our beachside communities. What was left of that house. The destruction was so total, and it wasn't just the possessions that were lost. It was the memorabilia. It was the pictures. It were the precious moments that were identified with trinkets or mementos. It was a terrible period. Mr. President, I'm here to say that we're going to stand with those who have lost so much, and we're going to help them recover and rebuild their lives. Superstorm Sandy was one of the most powerful storms in American history, and it was the largest hurricane on record. Wild winds that stretched more than 1,100 miles. We're aware at least of 119 Americans who lost their lives as a result of this storm, including 33 from my home state of New Jersey. The human toll of this storm defies description. Roughly 8 million homes lost power during the storm, including more than 2.5 million in my home state. Food rotted in refrigerators, water treatment plants closed down, and when the temperatures dropped, thousands were left cold and hungry, forced into hotels, temporary shelters. Many families slept in their cars to get out of the bad weather, had no choice. When people finally returned home, many found nothing there. Imagine seeing the home that you worked for your whole life, the place you raised your children, created so many memories, gone. And if we look here, we see a picture of despair as it was portrayed by this person who obviously stood in front of a destroyed home, nothing but timbers and concrete, everything else gone. Mr. President, we saw devastation across our state, not just at the seashore. I went to Hoboken, one of our most attractive commuting communities in North Jersey, in the days after the storm. Half of that city was underwater, and the National Guard had to rescue those who were trapped in their homes without heat or supplies. We also saw at the train station that was flooded out, inoperable. Water levels reached more than 6 feet. Can you imagine in a room that seated people waiting for their train, or 6 feet high in water. New Jerseyans depended on our public transportation and rail system. Commuters in our state take nearly 1 million trips per day going back and forth to New York and into Pennsylvania. And the entire country depends on the goods that comes into our ports and goes out by rail. Our transportation system was torn apart. Tunnels were flooded. Critical equipment was ruined. Rail lines were warped or buried by debris. And here we see an example of what took place. This is a rail line, a New Jersey Transit. Each one of our 21 counties in New Jersey were declared major disasters. But the seashore community was hit especially hard. The boardwalk is the defining image of the New Jersey shore. Many of us remember walking on that boardwalk in wonderment at the attractions. The boardwalk has been a constant in the lives of those who live there or visit the shore. But for communities like Belmar, Seaside Heights, the Atlantic City, and others, much of that boardwalk no longer exists. Just the pillars where the boardwalk used to be, as we see it here. It was a magnificent boardwalk and had people in cars that were in wagons that were pushed along, and you would view the sea and the attractions on the other side. And it was painful to see the destruction of the part of the boardwalk in Atlantic City firsthand that day. I joined President Obama in his visit to the area. For many people in my state, the boardwalk isn't just a source of pride, it's a source of critical income to our state. In 2008, tourism brought in $38 billion, the largest single source of revenues for our state, and supported more than 300,000 jobs in the state of New Jersey. Families came from all over the country to walk the boardwalk in Atlantic City or take a fishing boat out of one of our ports, Point Pleasant or one of the others, or ride the roller coaster at a pier in Seaside Heights. And this is what Sandy did to that roller coaster. Look at it. It's almost impossible to conceive that this roller coaster sits in the water. It's a terrible end to a lot of thoughts and pleasant memories. Mr. President, people in New Jersey have lost their homes, their belongings, and their jobs, and much of that public infrastructure has also been destroyed. But we're tough people in New Jersey, and we'll fight our way back from this storm. And I saw that spirit at emergency shelters in our state. Families whose lives were upended by the storm were welcomed into a safe, warm place by strangers, given a hot meal, and had camaraderie during these very difficult moments. Nurses and EMTs evacuated babies from hospital. They were carrying these children out so that they wouldn't be overwhelmed by flooding. Firefighters went from house to house saving lives as the water rose. Gas station owners who had lost power pumped gasoline by hand so that people could run their generators and keep their families warm. At one point, the lines were hours long waiting to get gas. One of the people from my office got up at 4:30 in the morning to go to a gas station and wound up 4 hours later before he could get gas. It was a terrible period. We saw the worst of Mother Nature in this storm, but we also saw the best of the American people. And one thing was established, that there is a place in government in our country for government service when it's needed. And we can't simply say, well, we'll turn it over to the private sector and let them take care of what FEMA does. FEMA was critical in the salvation of whatever we could have saved there, and there is no doubt in my mind that there is an understanding now as that didn't exist before. We saw the fiber and the character of our people in these terrible moments. It was wonderful. When we look at, this is a town not on the seashore. This is one of the communities in New Jersey where a lot of people who commute or work in the various industries around, that's where they had to go in order to save themselves from a worse situation that which already existed. People reached out to save people, and it was under the supervision of FEMA and our emergency facility organizations. We have a lot of important business to address before the end of this Congress, but our agenda must include helping to rebuild and restore the communities destroyed by Sandy. We're going to need a lot of money, and we can't turn our backs on it. We cannot turn our back. And I know that the occupant, the President's chair right now, had similar things in the state of Delaware. The destruction was all over, and we had no ability to stop what was going on. We face serious fiscal challenges in our country, but nothing is more important than keeping our communities, our families, and our economy safe. We in New Jersey have been there for our fellow Americans from other states who suffered disasters. And I'm reminded that New Jersey is the first state to sign the Bill of Rights. It started the road to freedom that exists in New Jersey. And now we ask all Americans to join us in rebuilding and recovering from this terrible storm. And I'm sure that we'll get even the most disbelieving people in our community that it might have been a good idea to fund FEMA and the other agencies that do so much. I went to Alaska during the Exxon Valdez foundering and saw our people, brave people, on islands stretched around Alaska, where our people were on the shore wiping off the ducks and the seals and all of that. And it says, America is not an accounting firm. America is a democracy with a heart and a soul. And that's what we have to keep in mind as we deliberate what we have in the future. With that, I yield the floor.
Mr. President, the Senator from Florida. Mr. President, before the senator from New Jersey leaves the floor, I just want to say that this senator's heart goes out to you and your people. We take hurricanes more as a part of our lifestyle from Florida, but when you combine a hurricane in the Northeast at this time of year during a full moon at high tide in one of the most densely populated coastal areas of the United States, then you definitely have a problem. And this senator wants to help you with what's going to be necessary for the additional funding of FEMA and so forth. I want the senator to think about an idea that we implemented in Florida to create, in effect, a reinsurance fund against this kind of catastrophe. We call it the Florida Hurricane Catastrophe Fund. This was done when I was the elected insurance commissioner prior to me, and then I had to implement it in the aftermath of the monster hurricane in the early 90s, Hurricane Andrew. As I have talked to our colleagues in the Senate about a national catastrophic fund, people in other parts of the country don't think hurricanes are their problem. But what they don't realize is that their taxpayers are picking up the load, whereas if we reinsured against this kind of tragedy in a catastrophic fund that would be paid in over time a little bit from each of the policyholders, then there would be this fund that would become a cushion for such a disaster that the northeastern United States is experiencing at this time, and of which we have so often on the Gulf Coast and the Atlantic Coast in the southeast of the United States experienced. So I just want to throw that idea out there for the Senator as he speaks so movingly and so eloquently about the suffering of his people. And you can just imagine what are going to be the expenses of all of the infrastructure that is going to have to be replaced.
If I may respond, Mr. President.
Certainly, I yield.